What would you say is the hallmark trait of being a Christian? If the church should be known for something and what it does, what should the church be known for? Let me give you a run-up to that. Let's start in the book of Deuteronomy. Yeah, Deuteronomy. You know, in Deuteronomy 15, God spells out a very precise situation, and in it, He reveals where His blessing and curse is found. It's a passage that I suspect you're familiar with. At least you could quote some of the words from it. But can you quote the rest of the sentence from which the phrase is extracted? Could you give more of the context of it? I suspect that if you had $1 for every time you'd heard or even used this phrase, you'd have a stack of cash. But I'm going to gamble that you probably don't know the context. Let's remind ourselves of it. Acts chapter 15, let's begin with verse 9. If you view your needy neighbor with hostility and you give them nothing, know that your neighbor may cry out to the Lord against you, and then you are the one who will incur guilt. So give liberally and give ungrudgingly when you give. For on this account the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in all that you undertake. Since there will never cease to be some in need on the earth, I therefore command this of you. Open your hand to the poor and to the needy neighbor in your land. That phrase that I know that you know, well, the poor will always be with you. That's this text. The poor will always be with you. I usually hear that statement right before someone says they're not going to give to someone in need. Deuteronomy 15 anticipates that very scenario and says, yeah, since there always will be those in need around you, make sure that you always have your heart and hand open to give generously to them, because people up against it tend to pray. And when they talk to me and they talk to me about how that you weren't open toward them, but you had the means to be able to give to them, you're going to be the one that I hold guilty. You don't want to do that. So why don't you just do what I said? Open your heart and open your hand and give to those in need. It's a very stark word, isn't it? And it's a stunning word as to the goodness of our God. It's a testimony to the amazing grace of God. God doesn't want a single needy person to be there among them, even though it is the reality. He gives the amazing opportunity to His people to reflect His goodness, to be an extension, to be a part of His grace. God blesses His people, and so His people are to open their hands and give the goodness that they've been given from God. Will God's people answer the call? It's as if this act of goodness, this act of sharing and charitable love, is the hallmark stamp that God truly is amazing and good. He gives a care for the poor. He even calls others to join Him in that project. He wants to stamp it out. Poverty, not people. If you understand that, then you understand no small portion of the book of Acts. Acts chapter 1 and 2, the church is born. The end of chapter 2, it's a great, wonderful thing to be a part of God's church. Blessings like you can't imagine. The early Christians understood that, and so they shared everything with each other so that there wasn't a needy person among them. Satan realizes this can't go on. I've got to do something about it. And so he stirs up persecution from outside of the church, pressure on the church from without. That's Acts chapter 3 and chapter 4. It even gets Peter and John thrown in prison. They're threatened to within an inch of their life. What will happen? They're released from prison, and they go back and tell the church. And the church says, we should pray. What do they pray for? Guts and grit to just keep being the church that they had been before, to keep holding up the resurrected Lord in their speech and their ways. And that shows, at the end of Acts chapter 4, by their generosity toward each other and to others who are in need. The spotlight falls on one particular individual as an example. His name was Joseph. He was nicknamed Barnabas by the apostles. To know what that means, Barnabas is the word for son of encouragement. Who could encourage the apostles of God? Barnabas did. How did he do it? He owned some land. He went and sold it. He laid all the proceeds at the feet of the apostles. He had been blessed. He passed the blessing on so that it could be distributed to those who were in need. Satan, seeing that he hasn't got anywhere from bringing pressure on the church from the outside, now worms his way inside the church. If you've ever experienced terrible things inside Christ's church, well, you're not only not alone, but that's the way it's been since nearly the beginning. Satan is alive and well on planet Earth, and some of his best work is found among God's people, not merely against God's people. God forbid, but it's just as true that, well, as true as the fact that the poor will always be with us. But how will we handle it? Now we're told of two other people. They are not sons or daughters of encouragement, quite the opposite. Ananias and Sapphira, they too have some land. They too sell it. But they sell it and take some of the money for themselves and then give the rest to the apostles, claiming credit for all being laid at the apostles' feet, lying in the process. They lie not only to their brethren, but they lie to the Holy Spirit of God. Peter confronts Ananias and Sapphira separately on these matters, and when he does so, by the hand of God, both of those people fall down dead. Great fear grips the church. The church responds properly to the amazing God. The great God that lays his hand on his people gives great grace, and so uses his people to be generous in that grace to people in need, either of their number or those who are yet to believe. And yet, this same God will not tolerate any kind of duplicity among his people. Hypocrisy nauseates the God that we serve. And if we think that we can be irresponsible with what he has entrusted us with, we're kidding ourselves. He holds us very responsible and accountable. How open-handed will we be to those who are in need? Do we begrudge passing on God's grace and gifts? Do we want to hide it for ourselves, even if it's just a portion? Or since it's been freely given to us, will we freely give? Maybe the best way to end this sermon is to end as that account in Acts chapter 5 ends. We're left only to shudder and to consider. Is my life about duplicity, or is it about honesty? Is it about greed, or is it about generosity and freely giving? Is it about possessions, or is it about divesting ourselves of our possessions when we see a far greater need in someone else? Are we seeking to magnify the name of him who is amazing, or have we allowed ourselves to be bedazzled by things and money as if they are amazing and not merely tools? Go and think on these things, my brother and sisters. The hallmark trait and stamp of being a child of God is to give to those who are in need. Is that your hallmark trait and quality? Practice the spiritual exercise and so develop the spiritual virtue of simplicity. Grace and peace be with us all and with all who encounter us.